Well, you already opened up the biggest can of worms of it all. So, as far as Chernobyl goes, I believe you told me number one that place was built wrong.
Well, it wasn't built up to the international standards. Those RBMK reactors, that's the size. They're designed differently. They use a lot of the graphite blocks that you saw in the HBO special. But one of the biggest differences between the Soviet Union's plants in those days and the international plants is the international plants have these huge containment buildings that hold all of the energy sources like the reactor, the steam generators, things like that. And these concrete buildings are 5 and 6 feet thick of concrete and 1-inch plate steel, all this kind of stuff. So if you do have any kind of an explosion or anything like that, steam explosion, anything like that, it's all contained within the building. The Soviet Union didn't have anything like that. They basically had an aluminum building. That was it.
So that when they built this thing, do you think they were kind of just basically cutting corners, like doing bad building codes? Basically, we would with houses, like you kind of bypassed all that to save money. Is that all you think that happened there?
I think it might have been. I think it might have been a little ego in there. You know, we know what we're doing. We don't need those things because it's never going to happen here.
Yeah.
And, I read the control room notes on Chernobyl, and the senior supervisors were very arrogant about that. When the operators brought up operation issues, they just shut them down. They said, you know, if you don't want it, get yourself relieved and get somebody else in here. That they would not hear of it.
Gotcha. And this was about what, 1985-ish?
I think it was 85 or 86. I can't quite remember, but
so the Soviet Union's still together. So yeah, I know they were always trying to, you know, be the best of the best. So I just wondered if you think it might have been a little pizzazz, a flair of like, you guys did what over there and spent how much? Watch us. We're going to spend only this much and run just as well. You think that's what they kind of did?
Well, you know what, Lauren, I'm not sure because in those days, the Soviet Union was so secretive about everything.
Yeah.
When this happened, they didn't tell anybody anything about it. And the only reason the world knew about it was a nuclear power plant in Sweden. The workers were leaving the nuclear power plant to go home. And every time you leave a nuclear power plant, you go through the last monitor, a radiation monitor, make sure you don't have any kind of contamination or anything. And the monitors were alarming. And they started and they did some analysis, and they found out it wasn't even the fuel that they had. So they thought that the Soviets had tested a nuclear weapon or something. And then they got everybody else involved. And finally, the Soviet Union said that we had had a nuclear accident at Chernobyl.
Wow. Yeah.
It was pretty sad. I was actually on the submarine in Seattle, and we picked up alpha contamination from the Soviet Union. That it just circled the earth. That's how it got in the jet stream, and that's all it took.
So when that happens to you, what do you do? Is there like how does it get out of your system?
Well, the biggest thing is you don't want it to get in your system. That's into you. I mean, alpha and beta can barely go through your skin, where gamma radiation is what they use X-rays for. I mean, it just goes through but it has to be very energetic to do that.
Gotcha.
But a lot of this stuff is really, really not going to do that much harm to you at all, really. I mean, the people that sadly passed away at Chernobyl, I know the news people say there were thousands and thousands and thousands of people. There were 31 people that died directly from a radiation exposure at Chernobyl.
That's definitely still too many, but that's a giant number difference of exaggeration.
Right. And also you have to remember in those days, it was very hard to get information out of the Soviet Union. And
yeah.
And reading a lot of the political opinions about when that happened, a lot of people say that was the initial step that caused the breakup of the Soviet Union, that they just mishandled that so poorly. And they literally had to call in help from the international people to get a hold of this reactor.
Yeah. And what set that off was that I guess everything should always be avoided, but was this something that they overlooked, or is this something that just happened?
No, this was a planned test. And
Okay.
What happened is, I'm not going to get into details because it gets really, really complicated.
Okay, yeah.
But they were supposed to be at a low power, and because of the grid demand, they were at a much higher power most of the day. So when it was time to do the test, the power had coasted down through reactor dynamics and things like that. So they pulled the control rods up to increase power. And they had already shut off a lot of their safety interlocks and safety systems that would prevent this from happening. And then power got lower and lower, and they started to pull the control rods out even more. And they found out that they really weren't going to be able to do the test, so they started to insert the control rods. And at those low powers, those RBMK reactors are unstable. And what happened is the power peaked, I think, at 100 times of the design of the reactor, and all of the water turned into steam. And when you take a pound mass of water and put enough energy in it to make it steam, it takes up 7 times as much area. So all that water, 100 and something thousand gallons of water in that reactor, flashed to steam, and the pressure relief valves weren't big enough to relieve that much pressure. So the lid on this thing, which is anchored with bolts, is a 150-ton lid. It blew off the top of the reactor and came down at an angle and hit the top of the fuel and knocked the bottom of the vessel out. Because the vessel is just a big steel bowl, and it knocked the bottom of that out, and that's where the fuel started to melt, and it went through the building. And I know you've seen pictures of the elephant's foot at the bottom of the building, and that's the fuel that was supposed to be in the core. And that steam explosion is what blew the roof off of the building, of their so-called containment building. And that purple fire that you saw was just the graphite and the uranium literally on fire. It was pretty crazy.
Great. So was that at, I guess what you're saying, it's not made to be a nuclear bomb, but if that got worse, could that have just, would it have been more of an explosion, or would it have been more radiation that shot and hurt more people?
Well, what happened was the radiation was totally exposed. The uranium fuel that was in the fuel rods, these long tubes, that got exposed, and then that's all in the atmosphere, and that's where the fire, and that's where you see the fire, the smoke going up in the atmosphere. That is just highly contaminated fuel particles that are just give off huge amounts of radiation. And the only way to shut that down is you saw the helicopters dumping bags of reactor poison, which could be boron or something like that, to shut the reaction down. So basically you had a nuclear reaction just out in the open. But the fuel for an atomic bomb to work, the fuel is very, very compressed. It's like the size of a basketball. And this fuel that they had is just spread out all over the building. So it's not in what they call a critical mass to do anything, but just generate a lot of radiation.
Between, I realize we're talking about two different situations, but between what happened at 3 Mile Island and what happened in Russia, what do you do for the area to kind of get it back like more safe? I guess more Chernobyl is obviously the worst problem, but once that stuff gets in the air, what is it? Is it the time? Could you do something to it physically?
Yeah, the radioactive strength of these atoms is based on their half-life. So you have to look where, like if it has a radiation level of a year, and in 1 year, it'll be half of the original strength that it started at, if that makes sense. And over a couple of years, that radiation level just slowly dies down. I mean, and they put a huge containment structure over Chernobyl now, and then basically everything is pretty much locked up. But around the area, it's like nature. Nature's going to rebound. And
so is this area? Could you go near Chernobyl now?
Oh, absolutely. Matter of fact, it's a tourist destination. And even after the evacuation of Pripyat, which is the town that was outside of Chernobyl, there were 600 or 700 people that never left, and they're totally fine. There's no fish, there's nothing like that.
So it's not like the Badlands where it's just like, because the way that even the documentary made it sound was just kind of like you can't go near Chernobyl at all. Like it's like,
Well, initially, before they got everything under control, sure, I wouldn't want to go there. But I mean, it's nature's going to take care of that. Like all the wildlife is back, all the natural scenery around there. Yet if you look at the town, it's all overgrown with shrubs and trees and grass and everything. So it's the further away from the plant, the radiation gets less and less, and it gets to a point where it's really not going to do you a lot of harm.